Hey folks, Steve here with an unboxing video today for The Great Crisis of Frederick II, a game by Tetsuya Nakamura, published by VUCA Simulations. Now I've had this game in its shrink for a little while. I just haven't gotten around to doing unboxing videos for it or any other coverage for it with life being busy and just things going on. And basically this is yet a case of the eternal wargamer problem, accruing games faster than I can play them. I really haven't had much time to play games anyway, but this was sort of a last purchase of the summer before I have to put a moratorium on things for a little while as the chaos of the world shakes out, hopefully. But I did get this, and I'm excited to take a look at it. I've definitely read some of the rules online, the errated, updated rules, and I kind of have a good sense to how this will play. I think this will be an interesting one to take a look at here. Now, there aren't many strategic level games on the 7 Years' War, at least the European theater. So as an American, I'm more familiar with the French and Indian War, that theater of the 7 Years' War, where it was British versus the French in North America. This game focuses on the European theater, which is really, when people talk about the 7 Years' War, they really do mean the European theater. Now, I have another game that covers the 7 Years' War in Europe, a game published by GMT, designed by Bob Kalinowski, and that is Clash of Monarchs, and this is a big, hefty game. It's out of print, so good luck finding another copy, and I don't think they've got immediate plans for a reprint. And the thing with Clash of Monarchs is, it is definitely a game by a 7 Years' War expert for the 7 Year War experts out there, or people who really are into it. And it's a pretty complicated game as far as multiplayer card-driven games go. And it has always been one of those things that I really like. It's a very cool game. It is hard to get to the table, and its complexity can be hard to get people turned on to. And so there was always this, for me, a place for a lighter playing 7 Years' War game that covers the European theater. And for a time, I thought that was going to come also from GMT in a game that they had on their P500 called Frederick's Gamble, the 7 Years' War. And that game was slated to be a simpler multiplayer card-driven game covering the 7 Years' War. One that was a little more accessible, one a little bit more similar in weight to some of the other traditional CDGs, Napoleonic Wars, that kind of thing. That was still sort of a up to 4-player game. And unfortunately, that game got canceled because the designer couldn't keep up. He had stuff going on in his life, and so that game was just canceled. And that kind of left a gap in my desire for games, because it was like, well, I like Clash of Monarchs. It would be nice to have something a little bit lighter that I could get into with people or play more quickly. And this game hit my radar as a potential fill for that hole, something that is lighter. So we're gonna unbox this sucker, and we'll talk a little bit about the game as we do that. So this being a game from VUCA Simulations, they don't have a whole lot of games in their back catalog known as VUCA Simulations, but that's going to be changing over time. You can see here on the back that we are talking about point-to-point movement, right? So if you're familiar with point-to-point movement games and card-driven games, this is going to look pretty similar. And you can start to see, they have the army units, leaders. We'll take a closer look at all this stuff here. As you can see the blurb there, we get a rule book, mounted map, some counters, some tactics cards, 4 6-sided dice, and a little bit of other bits of information. You see solitaire suitability is relatively high. Complexity is relatively low, and my understanding is I think this is sort of a redo of what was at one point a magazine game, and something to be said about magazine games, that they do tend to be lighter and quicker to play, and sometimes you lose a little bit of historical fidelity when you're in that mode. I will say that the box is pretty nice quality. It's got a nice finish. The cover is pretty nice looking. It sticks out in just the color choices that they made. So here's the rule book, and the reality is it's really not a long rule book. It is, I think, 16 pages or less. Yeah, 16 pages, including the back flap. where they kind of show, a sequence of play that's kind of spiffy looking. The pages themselves are all glossy, color printed, dual column format, and in the back is sort of a nice setup chart guide, so you can set up the game. That kind of gives you an overview of what everything's going to look like here. But I've read through the rules, and this isn't a review or anything, so I don't want to speak too much to it. The rules are pretty straightforward. In some ways, it reminds me a little bit of the No Peace Without Spain series that Compass Games does, where your sort of actions are going to fall somewhere within the move and fight or siege combat kind of thing, and that your units can be in one of two states, either fine or disordered, or have taken a step loss, basically. So a lot of the combat system, the status of units, reminds me a lot of No Peace Without Spain. I think the one thing to call out here is that this game is technically not a card-driven game. It is a chit pool game with some tactics cards that can change the game up a little bit for combat purposes in some events. They did provide, it looks like 5 baggies, which is hopefully sufficient to hold everything. It's always nice to see. I have extra baggies of my own, but nice to see that. Here are the counter sheets, and it looks like they are 4 square formatted. And just to show, this is the brown core quality counter. So these are nice. And I'll just say overall, like my basic, view of the material I'm seeing in the game is all very high quality content. This is very high quality material and components. So you can see nice punch out counters. These are not on sort of your typical sprues where you got to bust each counter off of the other one. I'm going to push hard and pop that guy right out of there. So you have Austrian units, you have British Hanoverian units, the Prussian units with their leaders, and you can kind of see leaders have a couple of values. One is their sort of combat rating, the other is how many units they can actually provide their combat rating bonus to. So there's obviously going to be differentiation between good leaders, bad leaders, that sort of thing. There are various markers to denote if units are defending in a fort. There are also control markers that are kind of straightforward, and various other markers that can be used on the charts. There are placeholders so that you can move big stacks around without carrying a whole stack of counters to and fro. So everything there seems pretty straightforward. There's some Russians, some French, more Austrians, and so on. So nothing too crazy there. Again, I'm going to end up popping these out, and you can see that they're going to have ever so slightly rounded corners already. They're going to be thick. They've got a nice feel to them. They're not overly glossy. So this is definitely a deluxe sort of quality product. So if this is the style that VUCA will be pursuing, definitely nice. I think in terms of cost, right? I mean, this is a spruced up, high quality game that is still a simpler game. So you're paying kind of for the quality of components. I could imagine like if the game didn't receive the same quality of components and went more middle range, you'd have a much cheaper game. But it is nice to see the quality the way that it is here. So here's the map, and I can tell you just right away that the map, oh, interesting. That's kind of, Okay, so I'll explain my surprise in a second. The map, I have it upside down before I lay it down. The map itself is quite nice looking. Really, really nice. I don't know what you call it. Aesthetic design, just in terms of the spaces, the art, even the tracks on the side are kind of laid out nice. Maybe a little busy over here, but definitely nice. And everything just kind of pops really nice with the colors for Prussia, Austria, Hanover, and so on. All very nice looking, and they pop in a nice way. The map itself is the mounted map, but the thin mounted map, which to me, I've been saying it in other videos, that is the ideal mounted map. You don't want the you know, quarter-inch thick mounted maps. They take up way too much space in a box. You really do want these thinner. You can kind of see my, you know, maybe as thick as a quarter. A thin but mounted map tend to be the best because they tend to be more useful with plexiglass if you use plexiglass, and they're just lighter and easier to manipulate. So very nice there. The feel of the map is nice just in terms of texture. What I was kind of surprised at, and it's kind of hard to show, but the back is not simply a black background or a white background. It's this sort of I don't know, like it's like wallpaper. And this is, it's almost like an entirely superfluous thing to have, but it matches the aesthetic of the map. So for some reason, you were flipping the map on its back to show something blank. It just is a nice back. It's such a weird thing to call out, but there you go. So yeah, there's the map. Looks pretty good. And I'm knocking stuff over elsewhere on my table here. 4 6-sided dice. Seem like they roll fine. Nothing too crazy, but you know, you're using basically buckets of dice combat system. So the more d6s you got, the better off you'll be. So nice they provide some here. And then finally, you have the tactics cards. And so these tactics cards are not cards used in the traditional card-driven model. So what you have here is like, this is a forest. You would use this card in an enemy's phase at the start of a battle, and +1 bonus to die rolls for the battle. And so it's saying like, okay, you're going to fight in that space, and the field of battle within that space, right? Because each space is actually a fair amount of territory. You force the battle to occur in a forest setting and get some help with that of defensive terrain. And that 1 in the upper left denotes that your leader who could use this card has to at least have a combat ability of 1. So basically, probably any leader can use this card. The back has a really nice aesthetic. You can see showing the Prussian and Austrian, or I think, yeah, sorry, that's one or the other, and I'm not going to recall which. Each side has its own deck of cards. So I'm going to go ahead and just take the plastic off the cards here as soon as I can find the... There we go. Find the cut I can use to open the packaging here. This tends to be why I don't do the cards on camera, because it takes too long to get things open. So in terms of the game itself, I'll say in terms of the rules, there are some things that I wish were in the game that do not appear to be in the game. And this is where that sacrifice for fidelity comes in. Okay, I got the card. So just so you can see, there are cards that are for the Austrian player. So there's the Austrian deck, sort of white backing with their symbol. You can see there's ones that require 2 combat ability. Other cards that can be played given certain circumstances, and then these are the Prussian cards, and you can see the back like so. So 2 different card decks. They look aesthetically pleasing. Nice production on these guys. So pretty straightforward stuff. So in regards to the game itself and how this compares, there's a few oddities out there with this. One of the things, as compared to Clash of Monarchs, for instance, and it's tough to compare the games because they're really kind of different purposes. You know, this is a 2-player game, or solitaire, that uses chit pool as how you activate units. So you're going to put chits in a cup, you're going to pull, that's going to determine what faction gets to go. And then you roll dice to determine how many action points you have to act. So instead of a card saying you have 4 action points to play, you're instead going to have that randomly generated by a die. That could mean that somebody gets bad rolls repeatedly and can't do much in the game. That's kind of a bummer. That's mitigated somewhat by the Austrian player having different factions that are going to go. They have the French, they have the Austrians, they have Russians at the beginning of the game. The Prussians get some extra bonuses, so they get a couple chits for Prussia. They get a bonus to that die roll for activity points so that Prussia can do more things just being Prussia. But the aspects of the game that I kind of question, and I just threw, while we were talking, those cards into a just blank card tuck box that I own, so if the game doesn't come with this, I have one. I just, for organization purposes, threw it in there. When it comes to, like, moving between spaces, it's straightforward, but what you don't have in this game is, like, interception. There is a sort of retreat before combat mechanism that's easy to do. If you want to retreat, you sort of can. You can refuse battle pretty easily in this game. But you don't have interception. That's sort of something that folks are used to in point-to-point movement games of this sort, the ability to intercept. There's no interception. There's no Kleinerkrieg, which is making reference to the light infantry forces that work to disrupt supply lines and different things during the 7 Years' War. Clash of Monarchs has a whole sort of subsystem to address that. In this game, I mean, it's simply not in there at all, and it really is focused on the European theater so much that there are no systems or anything to represent the colony interactions. So there's very little in any reference whatsoever to the events in North America or India during the 7 Years' War. It is strictly up and down European theater only. And so, I think there's something to be said here where, like, if I were to describe the gap in my game collection and what I can purchase for 7 Years' War games, where Frederick's Gamble, the game that was canceled, would have fulfilled it, I think this game fits into that hole a little bit, but it bangs around inside the box. There is still some things I might have wanted more out of this game that I've read about, and I've read the rules, I've kind of understand how the game works. I think there's some things that you could tack onto this to expand its historical fidelity and make it a little more fulfilling. Because it is less filling in that way, it means there's a big divide between what this game does and what Clash of Monarchs does. Just, much lighter, less historical detail, much heavier, more historical detail, but there are costs with that, right? Time, playability, and so on. I think this is an interesting game to have and to play. I would like to play it maybe on camera because it is solo friendly with the chit pool, so that's nice. It works solo. It can play up to 2 players. Technically, I guess you could try to play with more and kind of divvy up things, but I'm not sure it would work very well. It is light enough that it probably wouldn't be as fun for 4 people. So I think this game, just with my knowledge of it, might work really great for somebody who just doesn't have any 7 Years' War games at all, wants something light and quick and nice quality to play. I think this is going to work out okay for someone. If you're really into the 7 Years' War, then you may be better off finding a copy of Clash of Monarchs or pestering GMT for a reprint of that game, or finding some other 7 Years' War game that is more filling. This is maybe a snack. This is your set. I'm glad that I have this game, and I'm interested to play it. It's not going to wow me or blow, it's not going to blow my mind, and it probably won't blow your mind either. But again, it serves as a nice tasting of the period, and something that it will be relatively easy to set on the table and get to playing quickly. Again, the rules are pretty straightforward. Some errata exists. It's not killer. Would recommend taking a look at the PDF where they kind of point out some of those things, and they all make sense, and nothing too shocking in terms of errata there. Nothing I would say is like a deal breaker. It's easy to adjust. So, yeah, there you go, guys. The Great Crisis of Frederick II, game by Tetsuya Nakamura, VUCA Simulations. Looks like it's a neat little purchase if you're willing to pay for the really deluxe quality here. Until next time, guys, take care, keep gaming.